Well, do you love me? It's a very loaded question a lot of the time, isn't it? I mean, I quite like to use that with my friends when I want a cup of tea. In there, or it's, we use it sometimes. Do you love me? If you want something, especially Christmas time, right? But more likely, it's even if we hide it in lightness and maybe a bit of a joke or with a smile on our face, it's a way to seek what we are desperately wanting, to know whether someone loves it, a parent to a child to a parent, in a relationship, in a friendship. As a reminder maybe to commitment to each other, or to see where something is going, if it's early on in a relationship maybe, or sadly quite often in the ending of a relationship. And then there's the manipulative use of that word, do you love me? If you do love me, you would do X, Y, or Z, right? And I saw that a lot in especially the women's prisons, where they'd done it, being asked by someone, do you love me? If you love me, you'll do this for me. And it ends them up in prison. But here, Jesus is asking the question, do you love me? And this ends our series on the questions Jesus asked before we go into Advent next week. And I think it's probably the best question to end the series on, because it represents everything the cross is there for. It represents, and we see the cross in action through Jesus asking this question. And he asked this question of Peter, Simon Peter, not because it's about Jesus and what he needs to know or what he needs to hear from Peter. Not because he wanted something from Peter, but because in asking it and Peter's response to it, Peter would find his purpose. He would realize something about himself and grow. And most importantly through it, Peter would find redemption and healing. Do you love me? Peter was the disciple who was enthusiastic, got right to the heart of everything, right? He absolutely loved it. He was impulsive. He was all in. He was well-meaning. He was the serving disciple, sometimes the model one, but most often than not, getting it wrong. He failed time and time again in his over-enthusiastic ways of wanting to please Jesus and be all in. And I think we can find ourselves in most of the disciples, really. There are times when we are doubting Thomas, aren't we? And we doubt sometimes. There are times when we're like John the Beloved, when we just feel so close to God and we don't want that moment to end. But let's be honest, unless it's just me, we're most often like Simon Peter, getting it wrong in the time. And then, once we've got it wrong, feeling bad that we got it wrong. But for all his mistakes, I want to suggest that he probably learned the most from Jesus about being a disciple, through all those failures and bumblings. I am going to all make you laugh now. If you see what's at the door, as she's worked out she's not meant to be in the church on that. It's a party going on next door. And it was making me laugh, and then you're going to want to know why I was laughing in the middle of my sermon at a serious moment. So I think he learned the most about being a disciple of Jesus. Simon Peter, or later known as Peter, was the disciple who in the Garden of Gethsemane tried to protect Jesus from being arrested and cut the ear of the centurion, the guard. And he was the one who wanted to build the memorial at the Transfiguration. He was the one that walked on water, wasn't he? He was the one at the Last Supper who said, no, don't wash my feet, wash all of me. Just missing the point slightly. And he was, what she's probably best known for in this moment, the disciple who said he would never deny Jesus. And Jesus said to him, you'll deny me 3 times before the cock crows. And we know that's exactly what he did. As far as we can see from the Gospels, that was the last time he saw Jesus. It doesn't say he was in the room where Jesus appeared twice before in the Gospel of John. It doesn't say he was there. And he may well have been there, but Jesus appeared. Maybe there wasn't time for a conversation or for him to find out whether he was forgiven or not, or if he was to be totally rejected and cast out because of his denial. And I imagine in his heart, he just wanted to make it all right for the biggest wrong in his life, where he failed his friend at his darkest hour, when he asked him for that. And he said, I don't know him. I don't know him. I don't know him. And the cock crows. And the last thing he sees of Jesus is his face in that moment of denial. Imagine that. That was all he was remembering and dwelling on, probably, as Jesus died and was resurrected, and he hadn't met him again yet until this moment on the beach. And so what do we learn from Jesus and from Peter in how he is with each of us as we get it wrong so often? Well, the first thing we realize is he meets us exactly where we're at. He didn't wait for Peter to be praying somewhere together with his disciples. He didn't wait for him to be doing mystery and come along and help him. He was there while they were fishing, trying to make a living and survive. He was there when they were struggling making a living and not catching any fish. And he shouts out to them, throw the nets on the other side, and performs a miracle. That's for another sermon. It's not for today's sermon, the miracle. But even in that moment, Peter didn't quite clock that might be Jesus, because Jesus had died and he was told was resurrected, but hadn't yet witnessed. But it does get their attention. And then it teaches us that sometimes Jesus is there in our everyday, in our normal, in our struggles, and even in the joyous times. And we don't necessarily see it, and we need someone else to point it out. And in that moment when there may be something we wanted, we have to set it aside and help the person see what that looks like. It may be in our time, it may be even in our worship, or maybe we want to encounter Jesus in a service and we set it aside so somebody else can have an encounter with him. The disciple closest to Jesus, right? The disciple closest to Jesus, John, is the one that recognizes it is the Lord. And instead of jumping in the water himself and getting to Jesus, or maybe he was a bit more responsible, getting it to shore and climbing out and chatting to Jesus before he's saying, oi, this is Jesus over here, come and have a chat. He turns to Peter in the boat and says, it is the Lord. Isn't that beautiful? And Peter did his normal thing, impulsive as he was, jumped in the water, swam to shore, and got to Jesus. It is the Lord. He's kind of got his mojo back. He's got his second chance. He gets to Jesus, doesn't he? And then Jesus doesn't scoop him up, give him a hug, and pat him on the back and say, well, it's all right. Don't worry about it, Peter. All's forgiven. That's why I died. Doesn't do that, does he? He cooks everyone breakfast. So I'm sure he greeted him. And then as others got there, he sat and cooked them breakfast on the beach. And they did what they had done so many times in his lifetime. And they just had fellowship together. He was giving his gift of hospitality, which he so generously did all the time and still does give us today. And he had breakfast and chatted. And I wonder what that conversation was like. I like imagining things, don't I? Can you imagine? Jesus has died and he's risen again. I'd be like, what was that like? Where did you go? How did it feel? And what was it like talking to strangers who didn't recognize you? I'm sure they had that. Come on, they were human. They must have had that type of conversation with Jesus on the beach. And then the dreaded moment comes, right? You've all been in this situation somewhere in life. The dreaded moment comes, and Jesus says to Peter, come, let's have a chat. I wonder what he felt in that moment. You know, when we have sinned, it's a bit like going to the dentist, right? We know we need to do something about it, but until the pain is so bad that we have to, we try and avoid it all the time, right? Too busy, exactly. Thank you, Janet. Honesty from the front row there, in that, right? But what does Jesus do? Because actually it's best for us. He goes straight for the pain. He goes straight where it hurts most, where only you know inside you where it's hurting. And quite often we want to run away from that. Quite often we may feel that the pain's too much and we can't bear it. But Jesus meets us in that pain. And he goes to him and he asks him, do you love me? Not once, but 3 times. 3 times he asks him. And he doesn't do that to put Peter down. He doesn't do it to hurt him or pay him back for the hurt he caused him in his darkest hour. No, he does it for 2 reasons. He does it so that Peter, in his response, can recognize inside how much he loves Jesus. And it gives him the opportunity to express it to the one he denied. In finding that and being able to do that, he finds that his love for Jesus is now deeper and unwavering. It doesn't matter. He's always going to love Jesus. You know, we know that to be true if you think about any relationships, even in ones that may have been painful. We can all love people, right? We come to know new people. We love friends. We love in a relationship if you're going to be together with someone. We all know that love, right? But it's in the moments that you're there for each other. It's in the moments when you're there for each other in struggle. It's in the moments where you may cause each other pain and you work out how you're going to get through it. That number 1, your love for the other person deepens. And number 2, you begin to know that you can't be without that love. And your love for them is unwavering. Am I right? And Peter finds that in the moment. He finds out and understands the depth of his love for Jesus and the depth of Jesus' love for him. But you see, it's not until we go and address the pain and rather than run away, sit with it and allow God to heal us that he will do that. And so Jesus meets us and goes straight for the pain. But what could Peter offer? Because he's the other person in this encounter, isn't he? What does Peter offer in this? And quite hurt, and rightly so by the 3rd time. You know I love you. You know I love you because he knows, Jesus knows all things. And of course Jesus knows he loves him, but Peter didn't know that. And interestingly, Tom Wright tells us that the word Jesus used in the sentence, do you love me, the word for love, is not the same one Peter uses in his response. Peter uses a response that's maybe slightly lighter, not as deep, one where he's got a bit of a get out because he knows he's going to get it wrong at times and fail him. It's a bit softer in terms of the word love, a bit less committed than Jesus affirming, do you love me? I guess he was kind of hesitant to jump all in at that point, knowing his failures of jumping all in and failing. And he does that for the first 2 times. Jesus asks him, do you love me? And he responds with a lighter word 2 times. In the 3rd time, Jesus says, do you love me, with the word that Peter used. not because he expected less, but he knew in that moment Peter could only commit to what he felt he could commit to. And so Jesus met him where he was at. And later on, Peter would come to be able to tell him he loved him with the word Jesus used, I'm sure, because he stuck with Jesus. He stuck to his ministry. He was persecuted. He died a death on a cross upside down for the love of Jesus. That was far deeper than he thought he could do on that day on the beach with Jesus, because Jesus takes us through and shows us his love for us, and we respond to that. Do you love me? And Peter says, Lord, you know all things, and you know that I love you. 3 times he was asked for humility, for completeness, and for reassurance. If you'd only asked him twice, I bet you there would have been times to say, yeah, he forgave me those 2 times, but the 3rd time I did it, he didn't forgive me, and so maybe I'm not forgiven. 3 times he denied him. 3 times he asked him, do you love me? And it's interesting, isn't it? Each time Jesus asked him, do you love me? And Peter responded, then he gave him responsibility. Feed my lambs. Take care of my sheep. Feed my sheep. Each time, a bit more responsibility for what he was doing. But what was he actually doing? In Romans 11:29, it says, the gifts of God are irrevocable. When Jesus first called him from the beach, as he was a fisherman, and said, come follow me, we're going to be fishers of men together. He saw a leader. He saw someone who was strong. He saw someone whose enthusiasm and energy and, that single-mindedness to try and do what was right was going to make him a wonderful leader. He told him, didn't he, Peter, on you I'm going to build my church. He saw all the leadership, and in that moment of denial, Peter thought it was all lost. And here was Jesus giving back his responsibility of the leader he saw. And what does he give him? He gives him his own ministry. He's not giving it away, because Jesus is always, always the good shepherd. But what he does is say, share in this with me. Imitate me in the world, in the days you've got to live until you come home to be with me. And he gives him the same responsibility Jesus had when he was living, and the good shepherd in his human form. He does that with each one of us. We imitate Christ in any sphere we are, because that's what he asks us to do. But it shows a bit more than that. In his forgiveness, in his healing, in his do you love me, he's saying, I trust you with it. I trust you with the most important thing I have, my sheep. I trust you with the most important thing of my entire calling and why I went across the cross, the people I love. This passage is really special with me, and I genuinely wouldn't be ordained without it. A month before I was ordained, I had gone to my tutor and said, I'm not going through with it. I don't think I can do this. I just don't think I can follow through. I don't think I will be any good at it, and I may still not be any good at it. I just couldn't do it. I just didn't think I could make that commitment to God that I would do it. I was in quite a broken place. I was hurting, and I was on retreat, and I remember it so clearly. It was a beautiful day. The sun was setting, and they had like these banks in the retreat grounds, and I was sitting looking at the sunset, and the spiritual director had given me that in the day to go and meditate on this passage. And in that moment, as I was reading and praying, I felt the Lord say to me as I was going through, like, feed my lambs. I've been a children's pastor, so I was like, yeah, Lord, done that. Didn't need to be ordained to do that. I've done that. I can continue to do that. I love it. And as I went through each passage, I got to the point, I felt the Lord say to me, it's okay if you don't go through with this. It's okay if you don't get ordained. It's okay. You still have a calling. You still have a purpose. It's okay. And that completely released me from the pressure, from the obligation, from the obedience and everything, and shifted me to look at it and say, no, but I do love this. Typical me, right? You tell me I can't have it, I'm going to have it now. I'm like, no, actually, I do want it. In the moment, as I looked at him, do you love me? And in my response, I realized that all that for 3 years or longer actually had been clouding what my heart's desire was and what the Lord had put on my heart, that I could be ordained and serve him in that role. There's nothing more important about my role, it's just what I was called to go and do. And there, I was then ready to offer back what I was asked to do. Jesus trusts each of us what he asks us to do. And it's a wrestling with what we're working out, what God wants us to do. But it's one step at a time in front of us. Love the neighbor next door. Help people out. Say a kind word. The Lord, it will evolve and it will become something. And that is the calling. Jesus didn't let the church be built on Peter at the beginning, did he? He did in the end. Follow me. Imitate me in the world. That's what we're called to do. And I love this closure of Jesus in that encounter with Peter as he restores him. He ends where he began, on the beach. And he began with, follow me. I'll make you fishers of men. And at the end, after 3 times of saying, do you love me? And Peter's response and Peter's realization of actually he did love him and was prepared to do whatever, Jesus says to him, then follow me. Isn't that beautiful? How he brings it back to what's important. Jesus says to each of us, follow me, imitate me in the world. And we couldn't ask for more. That's a real privilege for us out of our love for him. But I tell you something, Jesus doesn't ask for any less. That's what he calls us to do. So what we need to do is look through all the pain, face it with him, because he's going to bring you to that place. Because in that place of pain and looking at it with him and working through it, when he brings to you in those moments the failures that you've done, it's not to guilt you, it's not to make you feel bad or unworthy. When he helps you face the disappointments in life, and we all have many, then we will find what Peter found. We will find forgiveness, we will find healing, and we will find purpose. But more importantly, just like Peter, we would find a love for him that we didn't know was there within us, and a love that will grow deeper and deeper as we keep following him for all the days of our lives. Peter did it, and he showed him that love for the rest of the days until he went to the cross too. Do we love him enough to trust him to meet you where you're at in the pain, and to gently bring you to face that pain, to come through it, to find forgiveness, and most importantly, redemption and restoration? Don't be afraid. Don't, like the dentist, run away. Sit with it, walk with him, and offer what you can of yourself, just like Peter, even if you can't offer everything he fully asks. And here Jesus asking you, do you love me? Amen.